So we are going to take a look at the heart. So we're in a different program that unfortunately does not have multi-user. So I'm going to get us to the cardiovascular system. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the heart because this program is really fantastic for visualizing the heart. So we are going to take a look at the heart. So the reason that this is so fantastic is because you can see here that the heart is beating, it's pumping, and it's moving all of the blood through. And we'll take a closer look at this. So here we are. We have the heart. I'm going to go through the different parts of the heart here. So first, we're going to go up in this direction. So you can kind of see familiar structures here, similar to what we saw in 3D Organon and similar to what you see in other images. However, in this one, we can actually see, we're going to get drawing capability here. You can actually see the blood flow. So the blue are supposed to be like blood cells, our red blood cells that are deoxygenated, and our red are blood cells that are oxygenated. So if I turn the model here, you can see this is the back or posterior portion of the heart. You can see the different vessels that we have talked about and that you're familiar with. So if we kind of start where I always say kind of the start is, even though it's a cycle, we can see here that this is our superior vena cava that has our blood, our deoxygenated blood coming from the upper portion or the superior portion of the body, and our inferior vena cava with the blood coming from the inferior portion of the body as it relates to the heart. So what's neat about this program, I'm going to take a look inside here. I'm going to stick my head in here, and this is where the blood is coming from. So right now my head is in the inferior vena cava, and you can see the blood is coming up through. And where are we going? What vessel or what chamber is this? That chamber is our right atrium. So this right here is our right atrium. So we have the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, both pulling blood in. So you can see this is our superior vena cava. If we look down, our inferior vena cava, and right now our head is in the right atrium. So then the blood, as you can see, is flowing down here. And what I can do here is I can slow down the heartbeat so you can really see the blood moving down here. You can see the atria contracting. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So you can see this one on this side, atrium, contracting and pushing the blood into the space here, which is our right ventricle. And again, we are passing the blood is going from our right atrium through this atrioventricular valve into our right ventricle. Do we remember the name of that atrioventricular valve? It has three flaps of tissue. So this is our tricuspid valve. And you can see the tricuspid valve, the three cusps, with the chordae tendineae, the cords here, that are attached to our papillary muscles that are going to make sure the flaps pull open, and then they relax, and then the flaps close. So you can see the blood is flowing naturally into the right ventricle. Then the atrium is going to contract, and it forces the last of the blood in, closes that valve, and then let me kind of pull us back out. So we were right here in the right atrium. The blood is going through that tricuspid valve into our right ventricle. I'm going to erase all of that now. And we're going to stick our head in here again. So we're going to come into the right atrium with our superior vena cava, our inferior vena cava, and we're right in the right atrium. I'm going to turn around. We can look down into or at the tricuspid valve. Now you can really see these cusps, right? So you can see one cusp, two cusps, and the third cusp down here. So that's the tricuspid valve. And then as blood, we're going to flow into our right ventricle. So if we look back up, you can see that was our right atrium, and you can see the cusps are closing. Again, the cusps are closing because if our blood in here and the pressure fills up, it's going to force those closed. Now remember that when those are closed now, we as a blood vessel, or as a, blood cell, red blood cell, are going to be forced up here. Do you remember what that is called, that valve? It is a semilunar valve because it looks like a partial moon, the cusps do. And if we are going from our right ventricle, we're going to go up through this semilunar valve into, let's see, right here, our pulmonary trunk. That makes that valve that we just went through, which was right here, the pulmonary semilunar valve. And so remember, the pulmonary semilunar valve brings the blood up into the pulmonary trunk. Then it's going to branch. It's going to go to the left lung over here, and it's going to go to the right lung over here. And we can really see that here. We can see the branch going from to the left lung and to the right lung. So then the blood, as it's in, for example, the left lung over here and the right lung over there, is going to become oxygenated. As it becomes oxygenated, then we're going to go back in. And remember, if we go toward the heart, the vessel is called a vein. So we're going to go in our left and right pulmonary veins. So again, I'm going to flip us around so we can look at the back. So you see this is our left grouping of pulmonary veins and the right pulmonary veins. And do we remember where those are draining into? Right. So if we are going through, ready, here we go. We're going to be a blood cell again. We're moving in through the left pulmonary vein, and we end up in, this is our left atrium. So you can see these are the right pulmonary veins. If I look back, you can see the left pulmonary veins, and we are in our left atrium now. And I'm looking down at our atrioventricular valve. And remember, this one on the left side of the heart is called the bicuspid. And you can see there's one cusp here and one cusp here. And so it is the bicuspid, two cusps. So as oxygenated blood now, we go through the atrioventricular valve, and now we are in the left ventricle. So now you can see, if we look back up, there's the bicuspid valve. And now remember, as this fills up with blood, it pushes that closed, and then we go out this direction. What is the name of this valve? It is a semilunar valve, and this one is we'll go up through it, and it's got a giant arch. We are going through the valve, which is about right here, and it goes up through this arch, which is the aortic arch. So that was the aortic semilunar valve. So we went through the aortic semilunar valve and up into the ascending aorta, then the aortic arch. And then if we were to continue back here, this is where we start the descending aorta. That's going to go down to the rest of the body. So we just traveled through the heart as a blood cell. And then, of course, as a blood cell, we would go to the rest of the body. So now what I'd like to do is go back to that partial view here, where we can slice and see the inside. So you can see, again, our trip that we made through the superior vena cava or inferior into the right atrium, through the tricuspid into the right ventricle. Then we would move up this way into, we are missing that valve here because of the way it cuts. The pulmonary semilunar valve to go into the left and the right lung, then come back through our pulmonary veins, left pulmonary veins, and over there, right pulmonary veins, into our left atrium. Then we'll go through our bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Then we go through our aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. But we can see that really nicely here. It is fun to kind of stick your head in and really visualize, but you can also see that well in this view. So remember, I cut down our beats here. So it would be much faster, something like this, right? 76 beats a minute or so. We can also change the cycle speed, so we can really slow it down. So you can see how it fills up with the blood. These valves close. Here, I'll slow it down even more. So we fill up with lots of blood down here, those close, and then they go out this way. So same thing. You can see the blood come in. So right now it's moving from the atria down into the ventricles, and then it gets forced out. Now it's getting forced out. Okay. So we'll speed that up to, well, we'll go to 100 on this. And we'll do something about, oh, not that high. All right. So now what I'd like to do is take a look at some other views. So here, one of the things that I love about this program is that you can really see the blood flow. Here we're just looking at the valves. So when you had that sliced cut, you couldn't see the pulmonary semilunar valve. But now we can really see how these valves are in association to each other. And you can kind of see the clear view of the chambers as well. So I'll stand here for just a minute so you can take a look at the deoxygenated blood, oxygenated blood, and see those valves. And recall that that lub-dub that you perhaps are hearing right now, you can see it's associated with the first one, S1, is lub, when these AV valves close. And then the second one, S2, is when the pulmonary and the aortic or the semilunar valves close. So lub-dub, lub-dub. All right, so now we're just going to take a quick look at this because oftentimes when we look at the heart, we don't really see the circulation of the heart. So this is the coronary circulation. You can really see all of the blood vessels that are surrounding the heart. So these blood vessels, of course, are the ones that are going to be feeding that cardiac tissue to ensure that it has the blood flow that it needs and therefore the energy that it needs to continue this contraction day after day, night after night. So now what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at the electrical cycle here. And we're going to take a look at an EKG or an ECG. So actually, before we look at the ECG, let's take a look. I'm going to slow this way down so that we can watch what's going to happen. So recall that up here is where we have that conduction system start, right? This electrical system that's in the heart that's going to make it pump. That's going to make the muscles contract and force the blood through the heart and throughout the rest of the body and the lungs. So up here, do we remember what this kind of node, you can see it kind of, if I speed it up here. So this bright yellow node, I'll slow it down again. Bring our cycle speed down and we'll bring our beats up. Okay. All right, so that is the sinoatrial node or sinoatrial node. So you can kind of see it here a little bit better. Remember that it has automaticity, which means that it's going to start this process. It's going to send out this action potential naturally. It's our heart's pacemaker, the body's pacemaker. So this is our SA node. So remember our SA node. It's not so easy to write with this. We'll just erase that. All right, so we have our SA node that's going to start that electrical conduction, right? We're going to bring this down, not to zero, but so then what we can see, right, is that we can see that electrical signal go all the way through the atria. I'd really like this to slow down a little bit more. Okay, so you can see it go through the atria, and you can see that it's going to go through that SA node into our left atrium. Let's see if I can get a different view here. We'll do a higher beats, and then we'll bring our cycle speed down a little bit, and then we need to get to our conduction system here. There we go. That's a little bit easier to view. So you can really see those fibers too. So recall that we have these fibers that are connecting us to the second node. But first, let's take a look at our SA node. Remember our pacemaker. And you can see that there's a band that goes over here. So you can see it's kind of clear, but right, this is our left atrium. So we have our right atrium here and our left atrium there. And you can see it goes from the SA node, and we send that message, that electrical signal across the entire. And so you can really see if we look over here, it's going through the entire atrium. And then we send that signal all the way to this central node here. Remember what that central node is called. Right, so this is our ventricular node, right? So we have our sinoatrial node, and then we have our central node there, the ventricular node. And what we're going to do is send that message from our SA node, and it's going to go around both atria, and then it's going to end up here at our ventricular node. or atrioventricular node. So remember that this is where it slows down. So you can kind of see it goes across the entire atria, pauses for a second. That's why I tried to slow it down as much as I could. Pauses for a second, and then we go down our bundle of His. So we have our bundle of His here, and then we spread it out to our left ventricle and our right ventricle. And then we have those Purkinje fibers at the very end. So you can see we have our SA node. We're going to watch it go all the way down to our atrioventricular node and then go around the ventricles. So you can really see that as that action potential, so remember that at this point we're depolarizing. So we have depolarization, which is where we have all of this sodium rushing in to the cell, and then it's going to change the voltage. So remember when we're in the nervous system, we talked about action potentials. It's going to change the voltage, which is then going to change the voltage on the next cell and the next cell and the next cell. So we have that being sent from this SA node. It surrounds both of the atria. They depolarize, and then they contract. And then that message gets sent to the AV node, and then it's going to surround the ventricles, and then the ventricles are going to depolarize and contract. So let's take a look at how that coordinates with our ECG. So you can see right here, we're going really slow. So there we go. So we see our atria depolarized, then we have our ventricles depolarized, and then we have repolarization. So you can see our QRS complex, remember, is the ventricles when they are depolarizing and sending that signal. And then we have repolarization. And remember, when the atria are repolarizing, that's happening during the QRS complex, which is when the ventricles are depolarizing. So we can't really see that. All we see is this first lump here, the P wave, which is when the atria are depolarizing. Then we see our QRS complex, which is the ventricles depolarizing. And at that same time, we have the atria that are going to be repolarizing. And then we have our T wave at the very end, which is when our ventricles are repolarizing. So I'm going to hold this here so you can take a look at this very slow movement and how it's associated with the electrical system in the cardiac cycle. And you can also see, which is great here, the blood flow and even the valves and how it's associated with the ECG. And I'm going to speed it up so we can kind of take a closer look and see how quickly that moves. So this is our cycle, our cardiac cycle, or our electrochemical cycle in the heart. If we go to our beats per minute, if we get up to something that's about right, you can see how quickly that's moving from our SA node to the AV node and then around the ventricles, and how quickly that's moving through. How much depolarization and repolarization is happening, how much we need sodium, for example, in our body to make sure this happens, how much we need potassium in our body, and how much we need calcium to make sure that we're sending messages as well. All right, great. So I'm going to remove that ECG. We're going to go back down here for a second. Again, this is our coronary circulation, so feeding the cells of the heart itself. Here's taking another look at remember these are our atrioventricular valves. On the right side, we have our tricuspid. On the left, we have our bicuspid. Here on the right side, we have our pulmonary semilunar valve. On the left, we have our aortic semilunar valve. And of course, the chambers are the right atrium, our right ventricle over here, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. Our great vessels include this pulmonary trunk moving into the lungs. Up top here, our aorta. And then over here, we have our superior vena cava, and at the bottom, our inferior vena cava. We'll then step one more out here. We can see the chambers as well as the valves. And then we'll move all the way out. And you can see the heart and it's pumping. You can also see here, I didn't mention these flaps of tissue here are the auricles. They're kind of an overflow. You could see when we kind of stuck our head in, ready, we're going to stick our head in this left atrium, you can kind of see this space here. It's kind of an overflow space. It also helps protect that atria so that there's some tissue on the top here protecting the atria, because there's one over here, the right auricle and the left auricle as well. And I didn't mention it, but we have our, we'll go this way. There we go. We have our we have our interventricular septum here. And then we have our septum between the atria as well. So you can see it's separating the atria here. If we kind of like look in here, we have this tissue. And you can see over here we have our deoxygenated blood. Over here is our oxygenated blood. You can't actually see it because my head's in it, but we have this tissue between the two atria that are separating the two. All right, so we're going to take just one more moment. I'm going to have you guys take a look at this because I think it's really helpful to see the blood flow. And again, I can turn it here. You can see the valves. You can also see, if I bring this down, pause it for a second, that the way these semilunar valves work is that when the blood is forced up through here, when the ventricles are contracting, this is the left, when the left ventricle is contracting going up into the atria, or not into the atria, I apologize, into the aorta. Once it's done contracting, and at this point we're filling the atrium with blood, and then that's going down into the ventricle, that this pressure down here is no longer higher than the pressure in the aorta in this example. So then what happens is the blood is going to flow backwards. But as it does that, as blood and liquid does, it's going to do that along the sides of the vessel. So it'll be along the sides of the vessel. It'll pool up then, and that's what ends up closing these valves. So it's going to go along the side, and then it closes the valves because it kind of cradles it. So if you can imagine, it's going to come down here, and then it fills up, and it pulls up here, and then actually closes the valve so that we don't have blood flowing backwards into the heart. And then when it opens again, it's going to open and push that blood out along with the forcing of the blood coming from the, in this case, left ventricle. And then same thing is happening in the right with the pulmonary semilunar valve. All right, great. Also, you can kind of see here, I want to make a quick note regarding blood vessels, and you can see the thickness here. So this is our aorta, which is our great vessel, and it's the largest of our vessels. It holds the most pressure, right? So if we are talking about our right ventricle, and where the right ventricle is contracting and forcing blood into, it's just going to the lungs, which is right next to the heart, on either side of the heart. So it doesn't have to have that much pressure built up. And you can kind of see that with our pulmonary trunk, with the actual vessel sliced here. So our pulmonary trunk doesn't have a whole lot of thickness here because it's not in danger of bursting as much as, for example, the aorta, because we have all of this pressure coming from the left ventricle because all of the blood has to get to the entire body. So blood has to get to our toes being forced out of the heart. So in that case, we have a very thick blood vessel here. And that's so that, of course, that pressure doesn't end up tearing the aorta. Now, as we get further and further away from the heart, it's going to go thinner and thinner, and that's part of our blood vessel videos that you should have already watched. But in this case, I also want to mention, in relationship to how much or how far the blood has to be pumped by each of these ventricles, if you look at the right ventricle and you look at the thickness of the muscle on the right ventricle, and you look at the thickness of the muscle in the left ventricle, you can kind of see also there's a lot more muscle on the left ventricle for it to be forcing that much pressure, the blood with such high pressure, out into the aorta and into the rest of the body. Whereas over here in the right ventricle, it's much thinner. And that's because, again, it only needs to pump it through our pulmonary trunk and into our left and right lungs, which are just right here, right next to the heart. So it doesn't have to go as far. We do have a pretty large interventricular septum, which of course is so that part of our left ventricle, it doesn't tear or anything, and it has plenty of muscle to contract the left ventricle. But also recall that this is where we have our electrical conduction system. This is where we have that bundle of His, which is right here, with the atrioventricular node back here. That bundle of His is here, and then it has to separate and bring our left bundle and our right bundle all the way to the Purkinje fibers. So we need to have space for that conduction system to go around the ventricles as well. All right, so that concludes taking a look at the heart and its associated vessels. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know.